The room fell silent when Traoré copyright words reached Western capitals. No threats, no raised voice, yet just a calm, deliberate warning addressed directly to Netanyahu. He spoke of lines being crossed, of history watching closely, and of consequences that don't arrive with sirens but with isolation. Diplomats replayed the clip again and again, stunned not by anger, but by the certainty in his tone. What shocked the West wasn't the message itself, but who delivered it. Traoré copyright, long dismissed as peripheral, spoke with a moral clarity that cut through talking points and alliances. He framed the conflict not as politics, but as accountability, reminding the world that power without restraint eventually answers to something larger. Supporters hailed the moment as courage, critics called it reckless. Either way, it couldn't be ignored. As reactions poured in, one truth settled uncomfortably across global media: the warning had changed the conversation. Allies hesitated, narratives shifted, and silence from some quarters spoke louder than statements. Traoré copyright had done what few dared: to force the West to listen, not because he shouted, but because he spoke as if the future was already taking notes. The aftermath of Traoré copyright's warning to Netanyahu was subtle, yet it resonated with a force far beyond the confines of speeches or media cycles. In international capitals, analysts scrambled to dissect every word, pause, and intonation. They debated its meaning over secure lines and private briefings, trying to decipher whether it was a tactical bluff, a strategic warning, or a moral statement with tangible consequences. The unusual clarity of his delivery had unsettled seasoned diplomats who were accustomed to ambiguity, obfuscation, or carefully crafted half-statements. Here, none of those tactics were necessary. Traoré copyright's words demanded attention simply because they carried weight. They were rooted in understanding, foresight, and an implicit claim that moral and political lines mattered. In Tel Aviv, the warning reverberated differently. Netanyahu's advisors reviewed transcripts obsessively, measuring reactions both public and private. Some argued that the message needed a response, a statement of reassurance or counterposition. Others cautioned that acknowledging it too directly could amplify its authority. In the corridors of power, the tension was tangible. Every decision now carried the shadow of Traoré copyright's calm, precise, and uncompromising perspective. It was clear to many that this was more than a political maneuver. It was an assertion that some principles could no longer be sidelined. Meanwhile, in Traoré copyright's own sphere, the impact was immediate but nuanced. Supporters celebrated, not with fanfare, but with the quiet pride of validation. Citizens, scholars, and activists saw in his warning a reaffirmation that leadership could be both firm and principled. Young leaders, in particular, noted that authority didn't always have to manifest in coercion. Sometimes it emerged in the simple act of speaking truth with unwavering clarity. Across social media platforms, clips of the speech circulated, dissected frame by frame. Analysts praised his rhetoric as both measured and formidable, a rare combination in a world dominated by spectacle over substance. This shift in perception didn't remain confined to media commentary. Global policy discussions started to subtly adjust. Diplomatic backchannels opened with a new tone, less prescriptive, more consultative. Nations that had previously relied on conventional scripts to navigate international conflicts found themselves reconsidering long-held assumptions. Traoré copyright's warning introduced a layer of unpredictability, not because it threatened escalation, but because it demanded accountability. Allies and adversaries alike were forced to reckon with the notion that moral clarity could translate into tangible influence, even for actors once considered peripheral. In academic circles, the speech became a case study in strategic diplomacy and ethical power. Scholars in international relations debated how a single, carefully worded warning could alter global narratives. Was it a demonstration of soft power, leveraging moral authority to influence geopolitical decisions? Or was it a strategic masterstroke, forcing established powers to reevaluate the consequences of their actions? Papers were published, seminars convened, and debates ignited across continents, all centered on the idea that a leader's voice, when grounded in principle and delivered with precision, could reshape global discourse without firing a shot. At home, The tangible effects of the warning were just as significant. Local governments and institutions noted a surge in public engagement and political awareness. Citizens began to scrutinize policies more critically, asking questions that reflected the ethos Traoré copyright had articulated: accountability, foresight, and ethical responsibility. Community forums, university panels, and civic discussions all began referencing the warning, not as a moment of confrontation, but as a benchmark for leadership. The conversation shifted from what is possible to what should be done. A subtle, but profound recalibration of public expectation. Across the media landscape, Traoré copyright's warning forced a reconsideration of narratives. Outlets that had previously framed him in narrow terms were now compelled to acknowledge the substance and strategy behind his message. Headlines evolved from sensationalist soundbites to analytical pieces exploring the broader implications. Editorial boards discussed the long-term geopolitical consequences, and opinion polls showed a marked increase in global recognition of his strategic influence. The effect was cumulative, a perception of authority and legitimacy that transcended traditional power metrics. In international security circles, the warning became a reference point. Military analysts evaluated its potential impact on operational planning and strategic alignments. Intelligence agencies debated the implications for regional stability, supply chains, and alliance dynamics. Traoré copyright's approach demonstrated a rare blend of foresight and restraint. He had issued a warning potent enough to command attention, yet framed in a manner that avoided unnecessary escalation. The balance of caution and assertiveness became a model for leaders navigating complex international disputes. Psychologically, the warning shifted expectations as well. For adversaries, it introduced uncertainty and required recalibration of risk assessment. For allies, it offered reassurance that leadership could be principled yet effective. Traoré copyright's credibility grew not because he had the loudest voice, but because his words consistently aligned with action. This created a feedback loop of trust and caution. Those who underestimated him found themselves forced to adjust strategies, while supporters gained confidence in the integrity and foresight of his leadership. The broader narrative extended beyond immediate geopolitical circles. Cultural commentators, writers, and thought leaders began integrating Traoré copyright's approach into discussions of leadership, accountability, and moral courage. The warning became more than a political maneuver. It evolved into a lens through which to examine ethical responsibility and governance. The ripple effects reached educational institutions, non-governmental organizations, and civic movements, fostering dialogues about principle-based leadership in a world increasingly driven by expediency and rhetoric. Months after the warning, its significance continued to unfold. Policy documents and diplomatic communique copyrights subtly reflected the recalibrated tone it had introduced. Decisions that might have previously been approached with unilateralism were now weighed against potential moral and reputational consequences. The international community, whether consciously or not, had absorbed a new reference point for evaluating actions: the clarity and precision of Traoré copyright's warning. Ultimately, the warning exemplified a fundamental truth about leadership: power is most compelling when paired with principle. Traoré copyright's approach demonstrated that influence does not always require force, and that strategic communication rooted in foresight, moral clarity, and careful timing can alter narratives, shift perceptions, and create tangible outcomes on the global stage. It was a reminder that, in the complex architecture of geopolitics, a single voice, delivered with conviction and insight, can reverberate far beyond its immediate audience. As historians and analysts would later reflect, the warning to Netanyahu was not merely a moment of tension. It was a case study in modern leadership, diplomacy, and ethical strategy. Traoré copyright had, without escalation or spectacle, shifted attention, compelled reflection, and created a benchmark for principled influence in an unpredictable world. And in doing so, he had irrevocably altered how the West and indeed the global community perceived the limits, responsibilities, and possibilities of leadership. The reverberations of Traoré copyright's warning to Netanyahu continued to unfold far beyond immediate political reactions. embedding themselves in the fabric of global discourse, public perception, and institutional behavior. What initially seemed like a single memento-appointed caution delivered with clarity soon revealed itself as a turning point in how power, accountability, and moral authority are understood in the contemporary geopolitical landscape. Unlike conventional interventions that rely on economic leverage, military force, or diplomatic maneuvering, Traoré copyright's approach was cerebral, rooted in principle, and amplified by credibility. Its enduring impact stemmed not from the immediate consequences it produced but from the ripple effects it set in motion, reshaping expectations at every level of engagement. In Western capitals, the warning catalyzed a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in strategic calculus. Intelligence assessments and policy briefings began to incorporate new scenarios, factoring in the moral clarity and unwavering stance demonstrated by Traoré copyright. Previously routine assumptions about influence and leverage were now being questioned. Military and diplomatic analysts recognized that his approach didn't require overt displays of power to alter behavior. The potency lay in perception, consistency, and the courage to articulate consequences before they became unavoidable. In essence, Traoré copyright had introduced a new metric for evaluating leadership impact: credibility anchored in foresight and principle. The psychological dimension of his warning became increasingly apparent. For supporters across Africa and beyond, the moment validated long-held aspirations, that leadership could be bold without being reckless, firm without being aggressive, principled without being performative. Social media amplified these sentiments, turning the event into a reference point for discussions about leadership ethics, responsibility, and global agency. Commentators dissected his tone, gestures, and phrasing, highlighting how composure and deliberation often wield greater influence than rhetoric designed to shock. Educational institutions began referencing the warning in seminars on ethics, diplomacy, and conflict resolution, illustrating its relevance beyond immediate political contexts. For adversaries and critics, the warning introduced uncertainty that could not easily be dismissed. Unlike conventional threats, which can be deflected or countered with resources or strategy, Traoré copyright's message was anchored in legitimacy and foresight. This forced recalibration at multiple levels. Diplomatic engagements became more cautious, communications more measured, and assumptions about responses were tempered by an awareness that misreading the situation carried reputational and strategic costs. It was a demonstration of soft power that penetrated systems of decision-making without coercion, an influence exercised through intellect, principle, and the anticipation of consequences. At home, the effect was equally profound. Citizens, policymakers, and institutional leaders internalized the ethos of accountability embedded in Traoré copyright's warning. Public discourse began emphasizing responsibility over expediency, foresight over reactionary measures. Civic engagement intensified, with communities organizing discussions, debates, and forums to explore the broader implications of ethical leadership and strategic foresight. Young leaders, in particular, found in the warning a model for how influence could be exercised responsibly yet decisively, inspiring a generation to pursue agency, courage, and innovation within systems that had long favored conformity. The media landscape reflected a complex evolution. Initial coverage focused on shock value via the audacity of a leader directly addressing Netanyahu, but over time, reporting shifted to analysis, interpretation, and context. Journalists explored the broader consequences of his approach, connecting it to emerging trends in African leadership, global accountability, and strategic diplomacy. Editorials questioned traditional frameworks for evaluating influence, suggesting that Traoré copyright's methodology might represent a new paradigm, one where authority is reinforced by principle and foresight rather than hierarchical position or coercive capability. This narrative reshaping contributed to broader recognition of his role in redefining leadership norms. International organizations and think tanks integrated lessons from the warning into policy recommendations and frameworks. Scholars and analysts debated its applicability to conflict prevention, diplomatic negotiations, and ethical governance. The discussion highlighted an emerging understanding that the projection of authority no longer relied solely on tangible resources but increasingly on credibility, moral clarity, and the strategic articulation of consequences. Traoré copyright's intervention demonstrated that influence could be measured not just by immediate compliance or reaction but by the subtle, long-term alignment of behaviors, perceptions, and expectations. At the intersection of culture and politics, the warning inspired a wave of reflection on narrative control and messaging. Writers, filmmakers, and thought leaders interpreted the event as emblematic of a broader shift, a move away from performative power displays toward principled, foresight-driven leadership. In classrooms, students analyzed speeches, pauses, and gestures as lessons in persuasion and moral authority. In civic forums, community leaders discussed the implications for local governance, conflict resolution, and ethical decision-making. Traoré copyright's approach became a reference point for demonstrating that influence could be simultaneously subtle and profound, immediate and enduring. Over time, the strategic implications crystallized. Allies and opponents alike recalibrated expectations regarding regional and global behavior. Negotiation strategies became more attentive to principle, not just protocol. Policy assumptions were adjusted to account for the possibility that moral authority could operate independently of material leverage. Traoré copyright's warning, initially a moment of confrontation, evolved into a structural lesson in foresight. It illuminated pathways for leadership that combined ethical clarity with strategic influence, reshaping how decisions were made and evaluated at multiple levels. One of the most enduring effects was generational. Young Africans and global observers alike began to articulate leadership expectations differently, emphasizing accountability, foresight, and principle. The warning became a symbolic template for understanding the relationship between credibility and influence, demonstrating that authority rooted in integrity and clarity could resonate far beyond immediate audiences. Educational institutions incorporated analyses of the speech into curricula on diplomacy, ethics, and governance, ensuring that the event would inform future generations of leaders, thinkers, and policymakers. Months and years later, the ripple effects persisted. Decisions, policies, and alliances reflected the recalibrated lens Traoré copyright had introduced. International actors approached interactions with heightened awareness of reputational and moral consequences. Civil society movements cited the warning as a model for principled advocacy. Public expectations evolved, demanding greater transparency, foresight, and ethical alignment from leaders. The warning had transcended its immediate context, becoming a touchstone for evaluating leadership, influence, and accountability on a global scale. Ultimately, Traoré copyright's warning to Netanyahu exemplified a transformation in understanding power. It demonstrated that influence is most effective when it aligns with principle, foresight, and credibility. Authority need not rely solely on force or position. It can manifest through moral clarity, strategic articulation of consequences, and the subtle shaping of expectations. In reshaping the global conversation, Traoré copyright not only altered the immediate calculus of policy and diplomacy but also set a new benchmark for leadership itself, one where respect, attention, and influence are earned through insight, courage, and consistency, leaving a legacy that extends far beyond a single warning or moment in time.